It's what you hearing. It's what you hearing. Listen. It's what you hearing. Listen. It's what you hearing. Listen. X gon' give it to you. What? Wait for you to get it on your own. X gon' deliver to you. Knock, knock. Open up the door. It's real. With the non-stop.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fantasy Football X Factor podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Lamarco. This week we'll be diving into the NFC North. First team on the docket will be the Bears. Obviously, a lot of excitement going on with the addition of Matt Nagy. This team really struggled on offense last season, but they stayed competitive in football games because of their defense. The great news is Vic Fangio is back, so that top 10 scoring defense is going to just be just as competitive as it was last year with Vic Fangio. This team finished 5-11. Obviously, the passing yards last season, they really held back Mitchell Trubisky. 32nd in yards, 25th in yards per attempt, and 31st in touchdowns. Their rushing offense was actually pretty consistent. It was in the top half of the league in most categories, 16th in yards. They finished 17th in DVOA and 11th in touchdowns. So that's really good news for them. But they finished 29th in scoring offense. It's very exciting that Matt Nagy comes into this offense now. He's going to infuse some life, and more importantly, he's going to infuse some red zone work as well. So the red zone offense for Kansas City and for Philadelphia last season were both in the top half in plays. Bears were 29th last season, 25th in touchdowns, and they had a 50-50 split. Andy Reid's offenses are typically more pass-heavy in the red zone. We saw that last season. Kansas City was at the top 10 in pass-to-run ratio. So they're not going to be as balanced in the red zone. You're going to see more passing attempts. But obviously with Jordan Howard being there, he's a great runner in the red zone. We'll touch on that in a little bit. The offensive line is actually pretty good. They lost Josh Sitton from last season, but they brought in the rookie, and they drafted in James Daniels, my apologies, to fill that void. But they also get Kyle Long back as well. They ranked 11th in pass blocking last season and 7th in run blocking. They also, a very good stat is they actually ranked 9th in yards before contact. So the yards they're generating for the running game is fantastic. And they actually have the rank of 13th this season. So they are a top half of the league in Pro Football Focus's rankings. So that's pretty exciting too with this new offense coming in. And just to touch on that, Matt Nagy comes in, and obviously Andy Reid offense last year, they're going to run a lot more shotgun-based offense, which is great for guys like Mitchell Trubisky and, of course, my boo, Jordan Howard. And also the other thing that is exciting too is they brought in Mark Helfrich. Of course, Mark Helfrich is the former Oregon head coach. Didn't have the success that everybody thought he would have there, but he was the heir apparent to Chip Kelly. He ran that spread option offense that Chip Kelly ran in Oregon. Obviously, due to some defensive concerns and also because of some concerns with the recruiting part, the Oregon Ducks fell apart. But Helfrich is still regarded as a very good head offensive mind. He actually got offers for another head coaching gig in NCAA, and also was actually recruited by Chip Kelly to join him at UCLA. Instead, he goes with the Bears. This is a very exciting turn of events because it's kind of what Mitchell Trubisky ran in college. So I'm pretty excited to see that. Of course, a couple other notable players that came in. The departure of Kendall Wright, ironically enough, last season led the team in targets with 91. But they bring in so much talent. They brought in Allen Robinson, Trey Burton, Taylor Gabriel, and of course they drafted Camp Darling, Anthony Miller. So there's a lot more playmakers on this offense that is at Matt Nagy's disposal and Mitchell Trubisky. So obviously Mitch Trubisky last season, wasn't great. He was actually finished 38th in points per game, but overall this season he's being drafted as a QB 27. He's kind of a sleeper for a lot of people. I think the additions of Matt Helfrich and Nagy and using that shotgun-based offense, we saw it on display in the first preseason when they only took one snap under center. The rest was under shotgun. And if you look at the college tape from Mitchell Trubisky, a lot of his big plays, everything was out of the shotgun. So he's going to be more comfortable in this offense this season instead of being in that offense that was run by Dow Loggins last season that's mostly under center. That's also done in the analytics. So another thing, too, I noticed is Mitchell Trubisky's tendencies. Last season, he actually had the third highest target rate to the slot. He actually 63.3% of his attempts were to the slot receiver in the slot. So whoever was lined up there got a lot of looks. And I don't see that changing much because, even Alex Smith last season was at 58% and Carson Wentz was at 60%. So this offense does utilize the middle of the football field. So I'm pretty excited to see that as well. And I think it's great news for guys like Anthony Miller and Trey Burton who live in the middle of that field. Last year, Mitchell Trubisky's wide receivers had more yards per catch than they did in air yards. So that means Mitchell Trubisky last season actually threw the ball short a lot. He was forcing his players to get yards after the catch instead of actually completing throws downfield. I expect that to change a lot this season, which is good for his fantasy value. Air yards is probably one of the better keys in the passing game to correlates to fantasy production. So, Alex Smith and Carson Wentz were over 60% in that metric. They actually, got more air yards. I think they expect to expand this offense too with Taylor Gabriel and Allen Robinson as well there, which is great news for his fantasy value. Like I said, you don't want yards after catches. Is the metric is about 1 to 1/3 to the air yards. So, in fantasy production. So we want to make sure he's getting those air yards, which is great. And really, to be honest with you, I'm not really high on Mitchell Trubisky being a draftable quarterback in standard formats. I think he's good for QB2 and 2 QB leagues, super flex, stuff like that. He's definitely draftable, but just kind of, right now, I think he's still having up and down camp. Reports out of there saying that, he's lacking some consistency. But it's also been the fact, Allen Robinson is just finally getting his feet under him. He's finally practicing. There's a lot of weapons in this. There's a lot of with Matt Nagy there and Mark Helfrich. So, he's a guy to not monitor. He's going to be on the streaming radar this season. And now to the most important. So we're going to go, actually, before we go into the rushing attack, let's dive into the wide receivers. So Allen Robinson's the most notable name from this team. His ADP right now is the wide receiver 20 in round 4. So, Allen Robinson's a conundrum to me because he's kind of like Jekyll and Hyde. So, in 2015, he was a top 10 wide receiver in yards per route run and wide receiver ranking. In 2016, he ranked 47th in both of those categories. So, it's tough to really see who Allen Robinson is. In 2015, points per snap, he was wide receiver 9. In 2016, he was wide receiver 57. And in his rookie season, he was wide receiver 41 in that metric. Allen Robinson had that monster 2016 season, but his 2015 season, his 2016 tape was not good. He did not perform the way he should have. And honestly, I think that's something that I'm going to have to monitor. Matt Harmon charted him for 2016, and he's good. He's pretty good in all areas, but he's not great in any area. So he wasn't green in any of the top half of any of the press man coverage versus man versus zone, but he wasn't bad either. So, Allen Robinson is a good player, but he actually had 2 polar opposite seasons. In one season, he was a top 12 right in that range wide receiver. In the next season, he was in the wide receiver 3 range. So in the second round, I think there's a lot of risk to drafting him. It's also because of this type of offense. So in Andy Reid's type of scheme, outside receivers you don't have a dominant number one. You're not going to see 150 targets from a guy like Allen Robinson like he did get in 2016 and 2015. You're going to get him around 110 to 120. Alshon Jeffrey last season was at 113. Tyreek Hill is 102. Even Macklin, in his breakout 2015 season with Andy Reid, had 120 targets. So the target volume isn't going to be there. And right now, he's being drafted over guys like Jarvis Landry and Chris Hogan, especially the first 4 weeks. I'd rather have Hogan, I'd rather have Landry, and, of course, you guys will see a post in a little bit, Michael Crabtree, who's one of my favorite mid-round values. But I digress. Taylor Gabriel, to me, is kind of off the radar because I think, the Tyreek Hill role from 2 seasons ago, that gadget-type player getting the ball in space is probably going to be Tyreek Cohen, not Gabriel. So I think Gabriel's more of a better fit for this team as a regular actual NFL player than a fantasy asset. I think the real asset here in value is Anthony Miller. So like we touched on a little bit, Mitchell Trubisky's tendencies, he does target the slot, but also the way this offense is designed is they feature red zone. In the red zone, they feature their slot receivers. So Anthony Miller, his ADP was wide receiver 53 right now. He's going in the 11th round. Obviously we're hoping for a Nelson Aguilar-esque season and not an Albert Wilson season. Nelson Aguilar finished as a wide receiver 3 this year. That'd be a great finish for Anthony Miller, and it's very reasonable. Albert Wilson wasn't as featured, but he was in the red zone. Nelson Aguilar and Albert Wilson both, were in the top 1 or 2 in their team in red zone targets over the last 2 seasons, as under Andy Reid and under Doug Peterson. Nelson Aguilar actually leads the team in targets over that span, and Wilson is second. So, I mean, this team is going to feature Anthony Miller in the middle of the field. They work inside out. Tight ends, slot receivers, that's who's going to be featured in the red zone. We see it based on Travis Kelce and Zach Ertz. And, of course, that brings us to Trey Burton, tight end 9, round 8. I talked about Jordan Reed in the other podcast. Trey Burton's right up there for me. So he signed a 4-year, $32 million contract to play the Kelce role for Nagy. That is kind of, follow the money. He's the only player on the roster that knows the offense. In an interview, he basically was quoted by saying he knows 95% of the playbook already. So he's got a leg up on everybody, which is going to help him, especially earlier in the season, with Anthony Miller being a rookie, with Allen Robinson coming back from injury. He's got the best passing game value in this offense. He's also got the most knowledge of this offense. He's going to be right in. He's already been told he's going to play that role. So let's just make it even more appealing for you. So this is for Travis Kelce and Zach Ertz among tight ends. They were both 10th in routes run. They were both in the top 15 in routes in the slot. They were top 4 in targets. And there was only 6 tight ends last season that saw over 100 targets. 2 of them were Zach Ertz and Travis Kelce. Top 8 in targets in the slot. Top 4 in yards per route run. Top 3 in yards per route run out of the slot. And by the way, they're both top 3 fantasy tight ends last year. This offense is created by the tight end. Trey Burton's got 100 targets in him this season, which is nearly impossible to find. But he's also got good touchdown upside as well. He's a good pass catcher. We saw that with Philadelphia when Zach Ertz went down. He was a streamable option then. I think at tight end 9 in round 8, that's right now my favorite range for tight ends. Even Kyle Rudolph with John DeFilippo over there is going to be a great, which we'll talk about in the next podcast. And the red zone work. So they both were top 4 in targets among tight ends in the red zone and top 7 in touchdowns in the last 2 seasons. So they're utilizing the red zone constantly. They got great. They actually been, they're used in the slot. They're used in line. They're moved all over the field. So this is a great opportunity for a guy like Trey Burton who already knows the offense. I think right now in the 8th round, you're getting a great value. You're getting a guy who can be a top 5 tight end along with Jordan Reed. And so basically that's how I feel about the pass catching options.